In the year 2702 CE, the galactic frontier stretched like a vast, uncharted canvas across the stars, where humanity's bold expansion clashed with the ancient empires of alien civilizations. The Terran relief ship Aurora's Grace cut through the void, its hull gleaming under the artificial lights of hyperspace tunnels, carrying supplies, medical aid, and a message of hope to the outer colonies. Amid the hum of engines and the chatter of crew members, Chaplain Elias Grant stood on the observation deck, his weathered hands clasped around a simple silver cross that dangled from his neck. At 48, Elias was a man shaped by loss and faith, his face etched with lines from years of ministering to soldiers, refugees, and the forgotten souls of Earth's diaspora. His eyes, a deep hazel, often gazed into the infinite black, searching for signs of the divine in the cold mechanics of the universe. Elias had joined the Aurora's Grace not as a warrior or scientist, but as a shepherd for the weary. The ship was part of the Terran Alliance's humanitarian fleet, dispatched to aid colonies ravaged by interstellar conflicts and cosmic anomalies. The crew was a mix of humans from diverse backgrounds, engineers from Mars' red dunes, pilots honed in Venusian skies, and medics who had seen the horrors of plague worlds. Elias moved among them like a quiet anchor, offering words of comfort in the mess hall or quiet prayers in the chapel pod. He believed in a God who wove the stars into being, a subtle force that guided without fanfare, evident in the improbable survival of a child in a debris field or the sudden calm after a storm of solar flares. That day, as the ship emerged from hyperspace near the neutral zone, bordering the Xelari Dominion, an alien empire known for its rigid logic and disdain for what they called primitive superstitions, Elias felt a familiar unease stir in his chest. The Xelari were insectoid beings, their exoskeletons shimmering with bioluminescent patterns that conveyed status and emotion. They viewed humanity's faith as a quaint relic, a psychological crutch unfit for a galaxy ruled by quantum equations and neural networks. Elias had encountered their kind before, during a relief mission where a Xelari overseer had scoffed at his blessing over a shared meal. "Your gods are echoes of your fears," the alien had clicked through its mandibles. "We measure reality, you imagine it." But Elias didn't argue. He simply smiled and continued his work, knowing that faith wasn't a debate to be won, but a quiet strength to be lived. Now, as alarms blared across the Aurora's Grace, that strength was about to be tested. Proximity alert. Unidentified vessels approaching fast. Captain Lena Vasquez's voice echoed over the intercom, her tone sharp with urgency. Elias rushed to the bridge, his boots echoing on the metal grating. The view screen displayed a swarm of Xelari interceptors, their angular forms slicing through space like predatory blades. The Dominion had been expanding aggressively, claiming neutral sectors under the guise of stabilizing anomalies. Rumors whispered of their experiments with reality-warping tech, but no one expected an outright ambush. "They're hailing us," the comms officer reported, fingers dancing over holographic controls. The screen flickered to life, revealing a Xelari commander, its compound eyes glistening like fractured jewels. "Terran vessel, you encroach on Dominion space. Surrender your cargo or be neutralized." The translation matrix rendered the words in flat, emotionless English, but the threat was clear. Captain Vasquez leaned forward, her dark hair tied back in a practical knot, her expression defiant. "This is a relief ship, non-combatant. We're carrying aid to the Epsilon colonies. Stand down, we're in neutral territory." The Xelari's mandibles twitched in what Elias recognized as amusement. "Neutrality is an illusion, human. Your aid masks espionage. Prepare for boarding." The connection cut and chaos erupted. Laser fire streaked across the void, impacting the Aurora's Grace's shields with thunderous booms that reverberated through the hull. Elias gripped a console as the ship lurched, sparks flying from overloaded circuits. Crew members shouted orders. "Divert power to aft shields." evasive maneuvers. But the interceptors were too many, their formations precise and unrelenting. In the midst of the turmoil, Elias's mind raced. He thought of his late wife, Maria, lost to a colony collapse years ago, and how her final words had been a prayer for their unborn child who never came. That loss had nearly broken him, but it had also forged his resolve. Faith wasn't about avoiding pain. It was about enduring it. As another blast shook the ship, sending crew tumbling, Elias made his way to the chapel pod, a small, reinforced chamber lined with holographic stained glass, depicting Earth's ancient cathedrals. He knelt before the altar, the cross warm against his skin. "Lord," he whispered, his voice steady despite the fear gnawing at his gut, "protect us in this storm. Guide our hands, shield our hearts. If it's your will, let us survive to serve." Outside, the battle intensified. The Aurora's Grace returned fire with its defensive turrets, scoring hits on a few interceptors that exploded in silent blooms of fire against the starfield. But the Xelari pressed on, their ships weaving in a deadly dance. A direct hit pierced the engineering section, venting atmosphere in a plume of escaping gas. Alarms wailed, hull breach, life support failing. Captain Vasquez's voice cracked over the speakers. "All hands, abandon ship. Get to the escape pods." Elias rose, his prayer unfinished, and joined the frantic evacuation. Corridors filled with smoke and the acrid scent of burning wiring. He helped a young engineer, Mia, who clutched a bleeding arm, guiding her toward the pods. "Stay with me," he urged, his tone calm like a father's reassurance. Mia nodded, tears streaking her face. "Chaplain, do you think we'll make it?" Elias met her eyes, seeing his own doubts reflected. "We have to believe we will." As they reached the pod bay, another explosion rocked the ship, flinging debris across the stars. Elias shoved Mia into a pod and climbed in after, sealing the hatch just as the Aurora's Grace began to fracture. The pod jettisoned with a jolt, hurtling into the void amid a constellation of similar vessels. But the Xelari weren't done. Their interceptors targeted the fleeing pods, picking them off one by one. Elias watched in horror through the tiny viewport as bursts of light claimed his comrades. "No," he murmured, clenching his fists. In that moment of desperation, he bowed his head again. "Father in heaven, hear my plea. Turn their weapons aside. Let your light pierce this darkness." Something shifted then, a subtle ripple in the fabric of space, unnoticed at first amid the chaos. One interceptor veered off course, its systems glitching as if struck by an invisible force. Another's laser misfired, the beam curving impossibly before dissipating harmlessly. Elias felt a warmth spread through him, like a gentle hand on his shoulder. Was it imagination? Adrenaline? Or something more? The pod tumbled onward, engines sputtering. As the Xelari fleet hesitated, their sensors detecting anomalies they couldn't explain. Hours later, the pod crashed onto the surface of a barren asteroid in the frontier's edge. A desolate rock pocked with craters and veiled in thin atmosphere. Elias emerged, coughing in the dust, his suit's life support beeping warnings. Mia stirred beside him, alive but injured. They were the only survivors he could see, the wreckage of other pods scattered like fallen stars. The asteroid's gravity was light, making every step a cautious bound. Elias scanned the horizon, jagged spires of rock under a sky dominated by the swirling nebula of the Dominion's border. No rescue signals, their comms were fried. As night fell simulated by the asteroid's rotation away from the distant sun, Elias built a makeshift shelter from pod debris, his hands blistering from the cold metal. Mia huddled inside, her breathing labored. Chaplain ... YS. Why did we survive when others didn't? Elias paused, staring at the stars that twinkled like distant promises. "I don't know, Mia, but I've seen enough to believe it's not random. There's a purpose, even in pain." He didn't voice the deeper thought, that his prayer had felt answered in ways science couldn't quantify. Unbeknownst to them, Xelari scouts had tracked the pod's descent. From their orbital station, scientists analyzed the battle footage, their compound eyes narrowing at the irregularities. Impossible, one clicked. The probability fields distorted around that vessel. As if ... intent shaped reality. The commander dismissed it with a wave of its claw. Human delusions. Secure the survivors for interrogation. Back on the asteroid, Elias knelt once more, whispering thanks for their survival. The air seemed to hum with quiet energy, the stars aligning in patterns that felt too perfect to be chance. Mia watched him, curiosity mixing with her pain. You really think someone's listening? Elias smiled faintly. Always have, and today, I think he answered. As the Xelari dropship descended, its engines roaring like judgment, Elias stood tall, his faith a shield against the unknown. But deep in his heart, he wondered, what if this was just the beginning? And in the silence of the void, a greater force stirred, waiting to reveal itself. The Xelari dropship landed with the precision of a scalpel, its landing struts biting into the asteroid's crust like claws. Dust billowed in slow-motion spirals under the weak gravity. Elias stood in front of the shelter, one arm protectively around Mia, the silver cross now tucked beneath his torn flight suit. He felt the cold of the rock through his boots, the thin air rasping in his lungs, and the weight of what was coming. 4 Xelari soldiers emerged, taller than any human, their exoskeletons lacquered in deep indigo and gold. Their weapons were not rifles but living things, biomechanical tendrils that writhed like serpents, tasting the air. The lead soldier's mandibles parted in a sound that translated as contempt. Primitive mammals, you will walk. Elias didn't move. We're injured. She needs medical attention. By the Accord of 2691, you're required to render aid. A ripple of clicking laughter passed through the squad. The officer stepped closer, compound eyes fracturing Elias's reflection into 1,000 broken pieces. Your accords are words on dead paper. You trespassed. You will be studied. The tendril weapon lashed out, wrapping around Elias's torso with cold, wet strength. Another seized Mia. She cried out once before the grip tightened, cutting the sound short. They were dragged across the dust into the ship's belly. The doors sealed with a hiss that felt final. Inside the Dominion research cruiser Verity's Blade, the air tasted of ozone and antiseptic chitin. Elias and Mia were separated immediately. He caught one last glimpse of her pale face before a bulkhead slammed between them. He was stripped of his suit, scanned by beams of violet light that made his teeth ache, then marched naked through corridors that pulsed with bioluminescent veins. Xelari scientists watched from behind transparent membranes, their claws tapping data into holographic webs. Whispers followed him in their clicking tongue. Observe the stress hormones. Note the anomalous neural pattern in the prefrontal cortex. Primitive yet. The probability distortion registered again, minimal but present. They placed him in a containment sphere, a perfect globe of force 10 meters across, suspended in a cavernous lab. Gravity was adjustable. Currently it was Earth normal, a small mercy. The walls were mirror smooth. No doors, no shadows. Only the watching eyes of the Xelari beyond. Hours bled into days. They fed him nutrient paste that tasted of rust and regret. They asked no questions at first. They simply observed. Electrodes adhered to his skin, reading thoughts he didn't know he had. When he prayed aloud, the scientists leaned closer, antennae quivering with fascination and disgust. On the 5th day, the chief analyst entered the observation gallery. Her name was Krushva, one of the most brilliant minds in the Dominion. Her carapace was etched with equations that shifted as she thought. She spoke through the sphere's translator with a voice like glass dragged across stone. You are the source, she said. During the engagement, localized entropy decreased by 0.003%. Statistically impossible. Explain. Elias sat cross-legged in the center of the sphere, bruised but unbroken. His voice was hoarse but steady. I prayed. Silence, then a burst of clicking laughter from the junior scientists. Kreshva did not laugh. Prayer is vocalized wish fulfillment. It has no causal influence on quantum fields. Elias looked up, meeting the 1,000 reflections of her eyes in the sphere's curve. Yet here I am. A pause. Kreshva's claws tapped. We will induce stress. We will see if your anomaly repeats. They began the tests. First came isolation absolute. Lights extinguished, sound nullified. Temperature dropped until his breath crystallized. Elias floated in darkness that pressed like water. He felt panic rise, black and animal. Memories clawed at him, Maria's hand going cold in his on a dying colony, the screams of the Aurora's grace as it tore apart. He curled into a ball, teeth chattering. And then, unbidden, the old words came. Not loud, not defiant, just a whisper in the dark. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. He didn't know if he said it aloud. But the temperature rose 2 degrees. The darkness lightened as if a candle had been lit behind reality itself. The scientists outside scrambled, sensors screaming. They flooded the sphere with neural disruptors, pain without source, grief without memory. Elias convulsed, tasting blood where he bit his tongue. He saw his daughter who was never born, saw colonies burning, saw Earth a cinder under alien suns. The agony was perfect, engineered to break the mind into its component illusions. In that crucible, something inside Elias stood up. He forced himself to his knees. Blood dripped from his lip onto the invisible floor. His voice cracked, but it carried. You think you're measuring me, he rasped. But you're standing in the house my father built, and you forgot to knock. For one impossible second, every light in the lab flickered. The containment field wavered like heat haze. Kreshva stumbled back, claws scrabbling for stability that should not have been lost. They shut the test down. Later, alone again, Elias laughed a broken, wondering sound. His ribs ached, his vision swam, but something vast and quiet had moved inside him. He pressed his forehead to the cold curve of the sphere and whispered, I'm still here, Lord. Thank you for not letting go. Beyond the lab, alarms began to spread through the Verity's blade. Other human prisoners, survivors from pods Elias never knew had lived, were showing the same probability distortions when they prayed. A medic in the infirmary, a pilot in the brig, even a child refugee clutching a rosary made of wire. Tiny miracles, wounds closing faster, restraints unlocking at impossible angles, guards hesitating at the exact moment needed for escape. Kreshva convened a Dominion's high analytic circle in emergency session. Holograms of the greatest Xelari minds flickered into being around a table grown from living crystal. The phenomenon is spreading, she reported. Contagious through shared belief structures. If unchecked, it could destabilize local reality within a light year. One elder clicked derisively, then eradicate the vector. Exterminate the humans. Kreshva's mandibles tightened. We tried. During the last test, the chaplain's containment field nearly collapsed. If we kill them all at once, the combined prayer event could rupture space-time. We risk creating a causal singularity. Silence chitin deep. Another voice, ancient and dry. Then we study faster. We dissect the mechanism. We claim it for the Dominion. Kreshva stared at the live feet of Elias now asleep in the sphere, his face peaceful despite the bruises. He is not afraid, she said, almost to herself. That is the part we cannot model. Deep in the ship's brig, Mia lay on a cold slab, her arm in a Xelari regeneration cast that itched worse than the wound. A guard passed her cell every 17 minutes. She had counted. On the 7th pass, the guard paused. Its antennae twitched. You mammals, it clicked softly, almost curious. Why do you speak to nothing when you are alone? Mia's voice was small but steady. Because we're never alone. The guard said nothing, but it did not move on as quickly as before. In his fear, Elias woke to the sound of footsteps that had no source. A guard stood outside the field young, its carapace still pale from recent molting. It stared at him for a long time. "Your God," it said at last, voice hesitant through the translator. "Does it answer?" Elias rose slowly, every muscle protesting. He walked to the edge of the field until only centimeters separated them. "Every moment I'm still breathing," he said. "That's the answer." The young Xelari's claws trembled. Then it reached out, with a shaking limb, traced the sign of the cross in the air, an awkward alien gesture learned from stolen human broadcasts. Outside the ship, Dominion fleets were massing. Orders had come from the highest spire. The humans were to be made an example. Total annihilation of the Terran frontier colonies if the faith anomaly could not be contained. Inside the Verity's blade, the air itself seemed to be holding its breath. And Elias Grant, prisoner, chaplain, survivor, closed his eyes and began to pray, not for escape, not yet. He prayed for his captors. Because someone, somewhere, had once taught him that was the most dangerous prayer of all. Far across the void, a Terran battle group received fragmented distress signals, impossible signals, from prisoners everyone believed dead. The war everyone thought was over was about to begin again. And this time, humanity would not be fighting with ships alone. The Verity's blade drifted in high orbit above the dead moon called Keth 9, a black sphere of iron and regret. In the ship's heart, the containment sphere holding Elias Grant glowed faintly, as though moonlight had leaked inside the hull. The Xelari scientists no longer laughed when they passed it. They walked faster, antennae folded tight against their heads. Kreshva stood alone in the observation blister, watching the human sleep. His chest rose and fell with the slow rhythm of a man who had already made peace with dying. The sight unsettled her in ways no equation could resolve. She had dissected stars, folded spacetime for breakfast, and still this mammal's calm defied every model. Behind her, the doors irised open. Commander Vexar entered, his war carapace lacquered blood red, the insignia of the highest spire etched across his thorax in living gold. "The Annihilation Fleet arrives in 41 hours, he announced. "Every human colony within 50 light years will be glassed. The Council has decided the risk of further. Contamination is unacceptable." Kreshva did not turn. "They are deciding based on fear, not data." "Fear is irrelevant," Vexar clicked. "Containment is absolute. You will extract the mechanism of the anomaly within 30 hours. If you cannot, the prisoners will be vented into the sun, beginning with the chaplain." He left without waiting for acknowledgement. The doors sealed like a jaw. Kreshva stared at Elias a moment longer, then activated a private channel. "Bring me the child." Minutes later, 2 guards escorted a small human girl into the lab no older than 9, hair matted with dried blood, clutching a rosary made from wire and plastic beads. Her name was Sophia. She had been pulled from a pod wreckage 3 days earlier. The guards shoved her forward. She stumbled but did not fall. Kreshva dismissed the guards with a flick of her claw. The chamber sealed. Only scientist and child remained, separated by the containment field that now held both Elias's sphere and a smaller one hastily erected around Sophia. The girl looked up at Elias, eyes wide. He woke instantly, as though he had been waiting for her. "Sophia," he said softly, pressing his palm to the inner wall of his prison. "You're safe." She shook her head, tears cutting clean lines through the grime on her cheeks. "They said they're going to kill everyone." Everyone left. Elias knelt so their faces were level, only transparent force between them. "Listen to me, little one. Do you remember what I taught you on the Aurora? When we sang in the chapel?" She nodded, barely. "Then sing with me now." His voice was raw, but it carried. A hymn older than starflight, older than the Dominion itself, rose in the sterile air. Amazing grace. How sweet the sound! Sophia's tiny voice joined, trembling at first, then stronger. That saved a wretch like me. Kreshva felt it before the sensors screamed, the same pressure that had haunted her dreams since the first test. Reality shivered. The containment fields flickered in perfect synchronization with the rise and fall of their voices. Lights dimmed. Gravity fluctuated by 3%. Somewhere deep in the ship, a bulkhead groaned as though the metal itself had taken a breath. The hymn ended. Silence rang louder than any alarm. Kreshva stared at the readouts. Entropy had dropped again, this time by 0.012%. An impossibility measured in cold numbers. Sophia looked at the Xelari scientist with the fearless clarity only children possess. "You're scared," she said simply. Kreshva's mandibles parted, but no sound came. Elias spoke instead, gentle but unyielding. "She's right. You're afraid because for the first time in your lives, you've met something you can't weigh or cut open. And it's bigger than you." Kreshva found her voice. "Your species is an infection." "No," Elias answered. "We're a reminder." He stepped as close to the field as he could without touching it. "Every one of your kind was born asking why the universe exists. You buried the question under logic and called it maturity. We never stopped asking. And something out there kept answering." Kreshva turned away sharply, but not before Elias saw the tremor in her primary claw. In the brig levels, word spread among the human prisoners like fire through dry grass. They began to pray not in panic, but together. A pilot whispered the Shema. A medic recited the Jesus prayer under her breath. A teenage boy from New Kyoto traced the Heart Sutra on the wall with a fingertip dipped in his own blood. The guards posted outside the cells felt it first. A creeping warmth, like standing too close to a fire you couldn't see. Their weapons grew heavy. Their thoughts scattered. One guard, the same young one who had traced the cross days earlier, lowered his rifle and simply walked away from his post. Alarms began to sing. On the bridge, Commander Vets-R watched internal sensors go insane. Containment fields across the ship were destabilizing in cascading sequence. Crew members reported hallucinations, brief glimpses of light shaped like wings, voices speaking in languages dead for millennia. "Lock down all levels." He roared. "Flood the human sections with neural gas." But the order never transmitted. The comms officer stared at his console as every screen filled with the same image. A simple wooden cross, rotating slowly against a star field. Vexar smashed the console with his claw. Sparks showered. In the lab, Kreshva made her choice. She overrode the containment fields with her personal code. Both spheres dissolved in a shimmer of collapsing energy. Elias caught Sophia as she fell forward. For the first time in weeks, he held a child against his chest and felt her heartbeat hammering like a bird's. Kreshva stood weaponless, claws open. "I should kill you both," she said. "You won't," Elias replied. She looked at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, deliberately, she knelt one knee touching the deck in a gesture no Xelari had ever offered a mammal. "Tell me what you believe," she whispered. "Not the words. The thing behind them." Elias closed his eyes. When he opened them, they were bright with unshed tears. "I believe the universe was spoken into being by a voice that still speaks. I believe every sentient heart is a room in a house too large to map. And I believe the owner of that house is coming home." Kreshva rose. "Then I will buy you the time to prove it." She tapped a sequence into her forearm console. Throughout the Verity's blade, doors unlocked. Restraints fell from human wrists. Guards found their weapons powerless, triggers frozen as though welded. Elias took Sophia's hand. "Where are the others?" "Deck 7, Kreshva said. "But the Annihilation Fleet is already here. 41 hours became 4. They will not wait." Elias looked at the stars beyond the viewport. Dominion dreadnoughts hung like a necklace of black moons, weapons charging with the cold patience of extinction. He breathed once, deep and steady. Then we'd better hurry. Kreshva led them through corridors now strangely empty. Crew members stood aside, some in terror, some in awe. A few reached out trembling claws to touch the hem of Elias's torn tunic as he passed, as though contact might explain the impossible. They reached the main shuttle bay. A single Xelari courier ship sat prepped sleek, faster than light, unarmed. Kreshva opened the hatch. "This will take you to the edge of the system. After that." She trailed off. Elias stepped forward and, to her astonishment, placed his hand on her armored chest, right where a human heart would be. "Thank you, Kreshva. He sees you too." She flinched as though burned. As the courier's engines warmed, Elias strapped Sophia into a seat and took the pilot's station. He had never flown anything more advanced than a colony hopper, but the controls lit under his hands like they recognized him. Kreshva stood in the shrinking doorway. "If your God is real," she called over the rising whine, "tell him some of us are tired of being orphans." The hatch sealed. The courier shot into the void. Behind them, the Verity's blade went dark, every system voluntarily powered down by a crew that could no longer bring itself to fire on the fleeing shuttle. Ahead, the Dominion annihilation fleet formed a wall of death across the stars. Elias looked at the little girl beside him, then at the cross hanging from the rearview strut, somehow still there, glinting in the cabin light. He smiled, small and fierce. "Hold on tight, Sophia." He reached for the hyperdrive controls. And somewhere in the dark between heartbeats, the universe leaned in to listen. The courier ship Mercy's Whisper, Kreshva had renamed it in the launch log before anyone could stop her, tore through the outer system like a thrown stone. Behind it, the Dominion annihilation fleet spread across the sky in perfect geometric formation. 100 dreadnoughts, 3,000 interceptors, and the flagship Inevitability's Law, a city-sized blade of obsidian and plasma. Their weapon arrays glowed the color of dying suns. Inside the cockpit, the only light came from the console and the faint silver of Elias's cross catching the starlight. Sophia slept in the co-pilot chair, exhaustion finally winning over terror. Elias let her sleep. Children needed dreams more than adults needed truth sometimes. He flew on manual, every correction a prayer in motion. The courier was fast, but it was never meant to outrun a fleet. Hyperdrive needed 38 seconds to spin up, 38 seconds the Dominion would never grant. He whispered anyway, the way a man whispers to a frightened horse. "Lord, you parted the sea once. I'm not asking for a sea. Just a crack in the wall." The tactical display painted the closing noose in cold red lines. 20 minutes to interception, maybe less. Elias opened a wideband channel, old, unencrypted, human frequencies no one had used since the early colony days. Static hissed like surf. He didn't know if anyone was listening on the other side of the void, but he spoke anyway. "This is Chaplain Elias Grant, formerly of the Aurora's Grace. To any Terran vessel, any human ear. We are two souls in a stolen Xelari courier. Designation Mercy's Whisper. Dominion Annihilation Fleet is 4 hours from glassing the Epsilon Rim. They're coming for all of us, because they're afraid of what we believe. I don't have weapons. I don't have a plan. I just have a little girl and a promise I intend to keep." He paused, throat raw. "If you can hear me, come running. And bring everything you've got." He left the channel open and let the static sing. Behind him, Sophia stirred. "Are we going to die, Father Elias?" He turned, surprised by the title. No one had ever called him that before. "I don't know, sweetheart. But I know we're not done living yet." She studied him with ancient eyes. "My mommy said when we die, we go to the house with many rooms. Will you be there?" Elias felt the tears come then, hot and sudden. He didn't wipe them away. "If I get there first, I'll save you a seat by the window." She nodded, satisfied, and curled up again. The proximity alarm screamed. Interceptors had peeled off from the fleet, closing the gap faster than physics should allow. They were going to be in weapons range in 90 seconds. Elias looked at the hyperdrive indicator, 29 seconds to charge. He closed his eyes and began to pray aloud, not in whispers now, but in the steady cadence he had used on 100 battlefields and 1,000 deathbeds. Our Father, who art in heaven. The first plasma lance slashed past the cockpit, close enough to paint the interior white. Sophia whimpered, but did not wake. Hallowed be thy name. Another lance. The shields flared, collapsed, flared again. Metal groaned. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done. The courier shuddered as grazing fire peeled armor away in molten ribbons. On earth and everywhere as it is in heaven. The hyperdrive indicator blinked green. Elias slammed the engage lever. Nothing happened. The drive whined, cycled, refused. Some Xelari lockout Kreshva hadn't known about. He pounded the console once, despair rising like black water. Outside, the interceptors formed a perfect kill box. Their targeting lasers converged on the Mercy's whisper like red spider silk. Elias looked at the little girl beside him, then at the cross glinting in the firelight of incoming weapons. He stood up in the middle of the cockpit, legs braced against the shaking deck, and opened his arms wide. Not my will, he said to the stars, to the fleet, to the God who hung them both, but yours. And he began to sing. Not the careful hymn from the lab. Something older, rawer. A Negro spiritual Maria used to hum while rocking the child that never came. Wade in the water, children. His voice cracked, but it carried. Through the open channel, through the hull, through vacuum itself somehow. God's gonna trouble the water. The interceptors fired. Every shot missed. Not by meters, by millimeters. Plasma lances curved, bent, slid past the courier as though the ship occupied a slightly different now. One interceptor clipped another, spiraled, detonated in a blossom of white fire. The pilots broke formation in confusion. Their instruments showed the Mercy's whisper in a dozen places at once, probability smearing like wet ink. Elias kept singing. See that host all dressed in white. God's gonna trouble the water. The hyperdrive indicator turned green again, this time solid, unshakable. Elias dropped into the pilot seat, engaged, and the stars stretched into lines. They vanished into hyperspace with the entire Dominion squadron, screaming after images that weren't there. Silence fell inside the courier, broken only by the soft thrum of engines and Sophia's breathing. Elias sat shaking, tears streaming unchecked. He looked at his hands as if they belonged to someone else. Thank you, he whispered to the empty air. Thank you for troubling the water. Hours later, they dropped out in the middle of nowhere deep interstellar space. No planets, no stations, just the raw dark between stars. The wide band crackled to life. A woman's voice, thick with disbelief and tears. Mercy's whisper, this is Captain Amrita Singh, Terran frigate Defiant Grace. We heard you, we're coming. Half the damn frontier heard you, hold on. Elias laughed until he cried again. More voices poured in, colony militia, privateers, old warships everyone thought scrapped, even a few alien voices, species that had quietly despised the Dominion for centuries. They were converging, not an armada yet, but a beginning. Sophia woke, rubbed her eyes, and looked out at the growing constellation of running lights appearing out of hyperspace like fireflies. Are those angels? She asked. Elias watched the ships come, hulls scarred and patched and proud, human voices shouting coordinates and tears and laughter across the open channel. No, darling, he said, voice rough with wonder. Those are people who decided not to let the dark win today. Far behind them, on the bridge of inevitability's law, the Dominion High Admiral stared at tactical displays that refused to make sense. An entire interception wing had been humiliated by a single unarmed courier. Probability graphs looked like abstract art. He turned to his science officer. Explain. The officer's claws shook. Admiral. The humans are praying again. All of them, at once. The Admiral's mandibles parted in something that might have been fear. Across how much volume? Every colony frequency we can detect. It's growing. On the main screen, a new signal blossomed, thousands of warp signatures, then tens of thousands, converging on the Epsilon rim like a tide. The Admiral stared at the impossible armada forming out of nothing but human stubbornness and borrowed ships. And for the first time in Dominion history, a flagship turned and ran. In the Mercy's whisper, Elias Grant closed the channel, took Sophia's hand, and looked out at the gathering fleet. The war had not ended. It had only just begun. And somewhere in the deep fabric between stars, something vast and ancient smiled a quiet, fatherly smile. Because the children were coming home. And hell itself had learned to tremble at the sound of their singing. The rendezvous point was an empty patch of space humans had once called Nowhere's Edge, a place so far from anything that star charts simply left it blank. Now it was the brightest spot in the galaxy. Ships poured out of hyperspace in waves, battered colony frigates with patchwork armor, sleek privateer corvettes flying false colors, ancient dreadnoughts that had been museum pieces a week ago, even a trio of Tessarian pilgrim arches, crystalline vessels the size of mountains, whose captains had heard the open prayer and decided, for the first time in recorded history, to fight beside mammals. Elias stood on the tiny bridge of the Mercy's whisper, Sophia asleep against his side, watching the impossible become real. The courier had been lashed to the Terran heavy cruiser St. Michael's Sword, its docking clamps groaning under the strain of 200 new vessels arriving every minute. Captain Amrita Singh strode onto the courier's deck, uniform scorched, eyes red from no sleep and too much hope. She stopped 2 paces away and saluted not the crisp military kind, but the slow, reverent salute of a daughter seeing her father after years at war. "Chaplain Grant," she said, voice cracking. "Permission to come aboard the holiest damn ship in the fleet." Elias laughed, the sound ragged but real. "Granted, Captain, though I think the holiness is catching." She stepped forward and, to his astonishment, knelt, not in ceremony, in exhaustion, in gratitude. "We were dead," she whispered. "Every colony from Epsilon to the Veil, dead and waiting for the hammer. Then we heard you singing in the dark. And we ran toward the sound." Elias placed a hand on her shoulder and pulled her up. "Get off your knees, Amrita. The floor's cold. We've got work to do." She rose, wiped her face with the heel of her hand, and grinned like a wolf. "Yes, sir." Within an hour, the ragtag armada had formed a loose sphere 50,000 kilometers across, engines idling, weapons hot. They called themselves the Prayer Fleet on every channel, half joke, half defiance. No one corrected them. Elias was given the chapel compartment aboard the St. Michael's Sword, a converted cargo bay with fold-down pews and a single porthole that looked out on the gathering ships. Word spread that the chaplain who bent reality was holding an open service. The bay filled until people stood in the corridors, helmets under arms, aliens among humans, tears on every face. He did not preach. He simply opened the old book and read, "Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death." The words rolled out like thunder over water. Every soul in the fleet heard them. Comes officers patch the feed through every speaker, every helmet, every silent corner. Tessarians shimmered in harmonic resonance. A Krogan mercenary, scales scarred from 100 wars, bowed his horned head and wept without shame. When Elias reached the line, "Thy rod and thy staff, they comfort me," the fleet sensors registered another impossible drop in local entropy, not dramatic. Just enough for tired engineers to look up from dying reactors and watch power levels climb for no reason. After the reading, Elias closed the book and spoke quietly. "We're not here because we're stronger or smarter or better armed. We're here because something heard us crying in the dark and decided the story wasn't finished. So tomorrow, when those dreadnoughts come, we don't fight for Earth or Mars or glory. We fight because love answers when it's called. And love, real love, never loses a child it can still reach. Silence, thick and reverent. Then a single voice from the back, a teenage gunner with a missing arm and a borrowed prosthetic, shouted, "Amen!" The cheer that followed shook the hall. Later, in the war room, Elias sat at a table with captains who had more decorations than sleep. Holographic displays showed the Dominion annihilation fleet burning toward them at maximum acceleration, now only 19 hours out. Admiral Okoye, a tall Nigerian woman whose dreadnought Unbroken Covenant had become de facto flagship, leaned over the star map. "They outmass us 3-1. Their weapons outrange ours by 30%. On paper, we die in the first salvo." She looked at Elias. "But paper never accounted for you." Elias shook his head. "Don't put that on me. I'm just the messenger. The power isn't mine." Okoye's smile was tired iron. "Then let the messenger tell us how to stay alive long enough for the power to finish what it started." They argued for hours, feints, minefields, ramming runs, desperate plans born of people who had nothing left to lose. Elias listened more than he spoke. When the others fell silent, he traced a finger across the hollow of the incoming fleet. "They're afraid," he said at last. "That's why they're coming in tight formation. They want this over fast before more of their own start asking questions. Fear makes people predictable." He tapped a narrow corridor of space between two neutron stars. "We meet them here. The prayer fleet holds the line, but we don't fire first." A Tessarian captain shimmered in outrage. "They will not hesitate." "No," Elias said quietly. "They won't, but we will. Because someone once hesitated for us." The room went still. Okoye broke it. "You're asking us to die with empty guns. I'm asking you to live with full hearts, just long enough." She stared at him for a long moment, then nodded once. "Madness. Beautiful, terrible madness. Plot the course." As the meeting broke, Elias stepped onto the observation deck alone. The stars outside were no longer cold. They looked like eyes watching, waiting. He felt the old fear crawl up his spine, the same fear that had whispered the night Maria died, the night the Aurora burned. The fear that said maybe this time the darkness would win. He gripped the railing until his knuckles went white. "I'm terrified," he confessed to the void. "I don't know if I'm leading them to victory or to slaughter. All I know is you brought us this far, so if this is the road, walk it with me. Please." No voice answered, no burning bush. Just the quiet certainty that had carried him through every graveyard he'd ever prayed in. A soft chime private channel. Kreshva's face appeared, transmitted from a hidden relay deep inside Dominion space. Her carapace was cracked in a dozen places, bioluminescence dim. "Elias Grant," she said, voice thin. "They executed the entire science cast aboard Verity's blade for treason. I escaped with 17 others. We are coming to you, slowly. Many will not make it." Elias felt his heart clench. "Kreshva, listen, the fleet you face is not unified." Whispers spread after your escape. "Entire ships have gone silent cruise refusing orders. The Admiral has begun purging his own. When you meet them, some may hesitate, some may even turn." She leaned closer, compound eyes fracturing starlight. "Make your prayer loud enough to reach the ones still able to hear." The transmission cut to static. 19 hours became 12, became 6. The prayer fleet took position in the neutron corridor, a glittering wall of defiance between two dead stars whose gravity bent light into halos. On every bridge, in every corridor, humans and aliens stood together and waited. Some held weapons, some held hands, some held nothing but the next breath. Elias stood on the St. Michael's Sword's forward observation blister, Sophia beside him in an oversized vac suit, her small hand in his. The Dominion fleet dropped out of hyperspace like a storm of black knives. For one eternal minute, nothing moved. Then the first salvo came, thousands of plasma lances crossing the void in perfect, terrible silence. Elias closed his eyes, lifted his face to the coming fire, and began to pray, not in fear, not in desperation, but in the calm, unshakable voice of a man who had already died once and been sent back with a message. And across every ship of the prayer fleet, 10,000 voices rose to join him. The darkness trembled, and the light that answered was not gentle. The first Dominion salvo crossed the void in a wave of violet-white death, 10,000 plasma lances moving faster than thought. They were perfect. They were absolute. They were supposed to end the war before it began. They never arrived. Halfway across the gap, the lances bent, not scattered. Bent, as though the vacuum itself had taken them by the throat and turned them aside. Some curved upward into the neutron star's gravity wells and vanished. Others simply stopped, hanging in space like frozen lightning, then reversed, accelerating back toward the ships that had birthed them. On the bridge of inevitability's law, the Dominion High Admiral watched his perfect strike become suicide on the main holoscreen. Entire dreadnoughts blossomed into silent fireballs as their own weapons tore them open. Shock paralyzed the command deck. No one had ever seen physics break formation. "Report!" The Admiral shrieked. His science officer's claws scrabbled over dead consoles. Unknown field effect. Probability collapse localized around the human fleet. Entropy inverted by 47%. This is not technology. This is, he never finished. Because the second wave, the one the Dominion had held in reserve, never fired at all. Across a third of the Dominion line, weapon bays stayed dark, turrets refused to traverse. Targeting locks dissolved into static. Crews stood at their stations, claws trembling, staring at screens that now showed only one image, a simple wooden cross rotating slowly against a starfield. The prayer fleet had not yet fired a single shot. On the St. Michael's sword, Elias Grant stood in the observation blister, palms pressed to the transparasteel, eyes closed. His lips moved without sound. Sophia stood beside him, tiny hands flat against the glass, whispering the only prayer she knew by heart. Behind them, Captain Amrita Singh watched the Dominion fleet tear itself apart and felt something between terror and worship rise in her chest. "Chaplain," she said, voice small, "what the hell are we looking at?" Elias opened his eyes. Tears tracked the dust on his cheeks, but his smile was fierce and quiet. "We're looking at mercy," he said. "The kind that breaks swords instead of bones." Then he turned to the COM panel and opened fleet-wide. "Prayer Fleet, this is Chaplain Grant. Hold fire." "I repeat, hold fire. They're not all the enemy anymore." For a moment, no one moved. Then Admiral Okoye's voice came over the command channel, thick with disbelief. "Confirmed. 32 Dominion capital ships just raised shields on our side. They're hailing us." The main screen flickered. A Xelari face appeared, carapace scarred and cracked, one antenna missing. The insignia on its thorax marked it as the captain of the battlecruiser Silent Witness. "Human vessels," it clicked, voice trembling through the translator. "This is Captain Trisak. We heard your prayer. We will fight with you, or we will die shielding you. The choice is no longer ours to make." Behind Trisak, his bridge crew stood with claws raised in the sign of the cross. Awkward, reverent, unbreakable. Elias felt his knees buckle. Only Sophia's small hand in his kept him upright. "Captain Trisak," he answered, "welcome home." The channel exploded with more hails. 40 ships, 70, 112. An entire Dominion battle group broke formation and crossed the line, positioning themselves between the prayer fleet and the still loyalist dreadnoughts. Their weapon bays opened, this time aimed at their former masters. The High Admiral of Inevitability's Law watched his fleet fracture in real time and finally understood what fear truly was. He slammed the fleet-wide emergency channel. "All loyal ships, purge the traitors. Fire on the mammals and the heretics alike." But even as he spoke, his own gunnery officers stood frozen. One by one, they stepped away from their stations. A junior lieutenant, carapace still pale from recent molting, looked straight into the Admiral's compound eyes and said, in perfect, unfiltered English learned from stolen human broadcasts, "No." The Admiral drew his sidearm and shot the lieutenant through the head. The body had not hit the deck before every door on the bridge irised open and the crew rushed him. The last thing the High Admiral saw was his own reflection in 1,000 furious eyes. Then the flagship went dark. Out in the void, the battle that should have been a massacre became something else entirely. The Loyalist remnants fought with the fury of the damned, but they were outnumbered now by their own kind who had chosen differently. Human ships finally opened fire, not in rage but in sorrow. Each salvo was accompanied by a voice on open channel, names of the dead, prayers for the living, blessings for the newly awakened. Elias watched a Dominion interceptor streak past the St. Michael's sword, weapons cold, broadcasting a single repeating message in Xelari and broken English. "We were blind. Now we see. Forgive us." Sophia pressed her face to the glass. "They're crying, Father Elias. I can feel it." He lifted her into his arms. "So am I, little one." The battle lasted 43 minutes. When it ended, the Dominion Annihilation Fleet no longer existed. Some ships were debris. Some had surrendered. Most had simply powered down weapons and waited, drifting like penitents. In the sudden silence, Elias opened fleet-wide again. His voice was hoarse, trembling, but it carried to every speaker, every heart. "This is Chaplain Elias Grant. The shooting stops now. We do not fire on ships that have laid down arms. We do not take vengeance. We take prisoners, we give medical aid, we open our tables and our hearts. Because today the universe just proved that no one is beyond reach. Not them, not us, no one." A Tessarian pilgrim arch, crystalline hull singing in frequencies only the soul can hear, moved forward through the wreckage and began broadcasting a single harmonic, the sound of forgiveness made audible. Across the former battlefield, airlocks opened. Xelari in vac suits drifted toward human ships, claws open in the universal gesture of surrender and supplication. Human Marines met them with rifles lowered and medkits ready. On the St. Michael's sword, the first Xelari to board was Krushva herself, carapace bandaged, one arm missing below the elbow joint. She knelt the moment the airlock cycled, forehead touching the deck in front of Elias. "I was wrong," she said simply. "About everything." Elias raised her up with gentle hands. "Welcome to the first day of the rest of creation, my friend." Hours later, in the chapel bay, now far too small for the crowd, Elias stood before humans and Xelari shoulder to shoulder. Someone had found a rough wooden cross made from bulkhead scraps. Someone else had etched a Xelari equation for "I was blind, now I see" beneath it. He did not preach. He simply opened his arms and said, "We were all prisoners once. Today the doors are open. Let's go home together." And 10,000 voices, human, Xelari, Tessarian, Krogan, and more, answered as one, "Amen." Far away, in the deepest vault of the Dominion highest spire, the ruling council watched the feeds in horror as their invincible armada became a pilgrimage. One ancient counselor, carapace etched with 10,000 years of certainty, stared at the screen where a human chaplain embraced a Xelari scientist amid the ruins of war, and whispered a question no Xelari had ever asked aloud. What if they were right? In the silence that followed, something vast and quiet moved across the galaxy like a breath held since the first dawn. And every heart, everywhere, felt the same gentle pressure. You are not orphans after all. The war was over. The awakening had only just begun. And somewhere, in the space between heartbeats, a father smiled at his children finally learning to walk toward each other instead of away. The battlefield became a cathedral. Where dreadnoughts had died, now hospital ships drifted in slow spirals, their running lights dimmed to soft gold. Where plasma had burned, Now shuttles ferried the wounded, human Xelari to Sarian, across the same hulls that had tried to kill one another hours before. No one gave orders anymore. They simply moved, as if an older command had taken over. Elias Grant had not slept in 51 hours. He walked the corridors of the St. Michael's Sword, carrying Sophia on his hip, her head heavy against his shoulder, and wherever he went, people parted like water. Humans touched his sleeve as he passed. Xelari lowered their antennae in slow, solemn bows. A Krogan Marine with half his face burned away pressed a massive clawed hand to his chest and rumbled, "Thank you for not letting us be monsters today." Elias had no words left. He only nodded and kept walking. He found Kreshva in the ship's hydroponics bay, once a luxury for officers, now a makeshift ward. She sat on the deck among rows of tomato vines, staring at a single red fruit as though it contained the answer to every question she had ever silenced. Her severed arm had been sealed with battlefield gel. The stump trembled every time she tried to close the claw that was no longer there. Elias lowered Sophia to the floor. The girl ran straight to Kreshva and, without hesitation, crawled into what remained of her lap. The Xelari froze, compound eyes wide, then folded her good arm around the child with exquisite care. "She is not afraid of me," Kreshva whispered. "She never was," Elias said. He sat across from them, back against a bulkhead, and let exhaustion take him for the first time since the asteroid. Kreshva's voice was soft, almost human. "I spent my life proving the universe was a machine, cold, predictable, and in one afternoon you turned it into a father who answers when his children cry." Elias closed his eyes. "I didn't turn it into anything. I just refused to stop knocking." Silence stretched, broken only by the drip of irrigation and Sophia's gentle snoring. Finally Kreshva spoke again. "They will come for you now. The ones who still believe order is more important than mercy. The highest spire will not accept defeat. They will send something worse than fleets." Elias opened his eyes. "Let them come." A soft chime at the hatch. Admiral Okoye stepped in, uniform unbuttoned, hair loose for the first time anyone could remember. She looked 10 years younger and 1,000 years tired. "Chaplain," she said, "the Council of Captains has voted. Unanimously, we're going to the Xelari homeworld." Elias felt the deck tilt beneath him, though the ship was motionless. Okoye continued, "Not with weapons, with everything else. Hospital ships, engineers, teachers, every soul who wants to come. We're going to land on their capital and dare them to fire on mercy itself." Kreshva made a sound like breaking glass. "They will glass the planet before they allow you to land." Okoye's smile was small and terrible. "Then we'll die on their soil instead of ours. And the galaxy will finally see what side was willing to kill children to protect its pride." She looked at Elias. "We need you to lead the way, not as a general, as a witness." Elias looked at Sophia asleep in an alien's arms. He looked at the tomato vine heavy with fruit no one had planted for war. He looked at the stars beyond the viewport, stars that no longer felt cold. He stood. "Then we go," he said. "But first we bury our dead." All of them, together, they held the funeral in open space. Every ship, human Xelari defector to Sarian Krogan, even a few silent machines from the long neutral synth collective, opened its hangar doors. Bodies were carried out in simple shrouds. Human burial flags, Xelari silk, Tessarian crystal. No ranks. No species. Just children coming home. Elias stood on a shuttle's open ramp in a vac suit, no helmet, the void inches from his face. Magnetic boots held him to the deck. Behind him, a choir of 10,000 voices, living and recorded, sang the old song, Requiem aeternam dona Ies Domini. Et lux perpetua lucide Ies, light eternal. One by one the bodies were released. They drifted outward in a slow, perfect sphere, human and Xelari side by side, catching starlight like seeds scattered on dark water, No one fired a weapon. No one spoke of victory. They only watched the dead become stars. When the last shroud drifted free, Elias raised his hand in benediction. "Go in peace," he said to the silence. "You are not forgotten. You are not alone." A Xelari captain who had once ordered the glassing of 3 colonies floated forward on thrusters, removed his ceremonial blade, and let it tumble end over end into the cloud of the dead. A gesture no human could have taught him. The fleet turned toward the Xelari core worlds. They called themselves the Covenant Fleet now. No one voted on the name. It simply happened, the way dawn happens. Behind them, the highest spire watched through long-range telescopes and felt the first cracks in a philosophy 10,000 years wide. In the spire's deepest chamber, the eternal custodian, an ancient being more machine than chitin now, stared at probability projections that no longer made sense. Every simulation ended the same way, the humans landing unopposed. The spire's defenses silent, the custodian itself kneeling. It ran the numbers again, same result. For the first time in recorded history, the custodian felt something perilously close to doubt. On the St. Michael's sword, Elias stood on the bridge as the fleet made its final jump. Sophia held one hand. Kreshva, bandaged and proud, held the other. Ahead, the Xelari homeworld rose like a blue-white jewel wrapped in orbital fortresses. Elias looked at the planet that had tried to erase his species and felt no hatred. Only sorrow. And hope. He opened fleet-wide one last time. "This is Chaplain Elias Grant. We are coming home, not as conquerors, not as enemies. As family you forgot you had. If you fire, we will not return it. If you open your doors, we will fill your tables. The choice is yours." He paused, and when he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of every grave they had just sung into the dark. "But know this, love is coming. And love has already won." The Covenant fleet dropped out of hyperspace in perfect formation. Thousands of ships of every shape and creed. Weapons cold, hangar doors open, running lights burning soft gold, directly above the planetary capital. Every defense battery on the planet locked. Targeting solutions chimed. Authorization codes waited for a single command. In the spire, the eternal custodian raised one trembling claw above the firing key, and could not lower it. On the main planetary broadcast, every screen, every speaker, every mind, a single image appeared. Elias Grant standing on the bridge, arms open, flanked by a human child and a one-armed Xelari scientist. Behind them, the stars themselves seemed to lean forward. The custodian's claw slowly opened. Every defense battery in the system powered down. Across the planet, 10 billion Xelari looked up at the sky as the first human shuttle began its descent, unescorted, unarmed, carrying only medical supplies and an old man in a torn chaplain's coat. And somewhere, in the deep places where equations end and wonder begins, the universe exhaled. The long war was over. The long healing had just begun. And the father who had never left his children's side simply waited on the doorstep, patient, quiet, smiling for the first embrace. The first shuttle to touch Xelari soil was not sleek or ceremonial. It was an old Terran medical bird, paint-scorched, hull patched with mismatched plates, registry half rubbed away by micrometeorites. Its name, barely legible under the grime, was Littleway. No one on board had planned the symbolism. It simply happened the way miracles do. Elias Grant stood in the open hatch before the ramp even kissed the ground. Wind from the capital's upper atmosphere, sharp metallic, tasting faintly of ozone and alien pollen, whipped his torn coat around his legs. Below him, a sea of Xelari faces stretched to the horizon, compound eyes catching the dawn in fractured rainbows. No weapons, no barricades. Only silence so complete, it rang like a bell. Sophia clung to his left hand. Kreshva, now wearing a simple gray cloak over her bandages, stood at his right. Behind them, Medics and engineers waited with crates marked in both Terran script and Xelari glyphs. FOOD, medicine, hope. Elias took one step down the ramp, then another. 10 billion beings held their breath. When his boot touched the polished obsidian of the landing plaza, a sound rose. Not a cheer, not yet. It was the low, resonant clicking of Xelari mandibles opening and closing in perfect unison. The closest their physiology came to weeping. Kreshva's voice cracked beside him. "They are singing sorrow," she whispered. "The old mourning song. They have not used it since the great dying 8,000 years ago." Elias squeezed her remaining hand. "Then let's teach them a new song." He walked forward. The crowd parted like water before Moses. An elder approached, carapace ancient and paper-thin, etched with the equations of 1,000 conquered worlds. He stopped 3 paces away, lowered himself to all 6 knees, and touched his forehead to the stone. Elias knelt with him, human knees on alien ground, and placed both hands gently on the elder's bowed head. "Peace," he said in the elder's own clicking tongue. Words Kreshva had drilled into him during the long jump. "We did not come to rule. We came to remember together that we were never meant to be alone." The elder's entire frame shook. When he raised his face, his compound eyes were wet. "Forgive us," he rasped through the translator. "We measured the universe and forgot to weigh mercy." Elias helped him stand. "Mercy isn't weighed, it's given. And there's always more." Then the dam broke. Xelari surged forward, not in violence, but in need. They reached out with trembling claws to touch the hem of his coat, the child's hair, Kreshva's bandaged stump. Some collapsed where they stood, mandibles working soundlessly. Others lifted their young forward so the little ones could see the mammals who had refused to hate them. Sophia, fearless 9 years old, and already wiser than empires, stepped away from Elias and walked straight into the crowd. A Xelari hatchling, no taller than her knee, stared up with liquid black eyes. Sophia knelt, unclasped the wire and bead rosary from her own neck, the one she had made from pod wreckage, and placed it around the hatchling's tiny thorax. The hatchling touched the beads with wonder, then did something no human had ever seen. It hugged her. 6 fragile arms wrapped around Sophia's shoulders, and the child hugged back like she had been waiting her whole life for this exact moment. Cameras broadcast the embrace to every corner of the planet, to every corner of the galaxy. Within an hour, the plaza became a city of open hands. Human medics treated Xelari wounded from purges that had begun the moment the fleet surrendered. Xelari engineers helped Terran pilots land overloaded shuttles on streets never designed for it. Children, human and Xelari, chased one another between the legs of adults who were too busy crying to scold them. Elias walked the streets until his legs gave out. He sat on the edge of a fountain carved with the equations of conquest and let the water run over his blistered hands. Kreshva found him there at dusk. "They want to crown you," she said quietly. "Some want to worship you. The council has dissolved itself. They are asking what comes next." Elias laughed until it hurt. "Tell them I'm a chaplain, not a king. And definitely not a god. Tell them what comes next is dinner, real dinner. Everyone invited. And tomorrow we start fixing what we broke, together." Kreshva studied him for a long time. "You are the most dangerous human I have ever met." He raised an eyebrow. "Dangerous? You carry a weapon no fleet can match," she said, tapping the place over his heart. "And you refuse to use it for anything but healing." Night fell violet and gold. The capital's bioluminescent towers lit one by one, not in triumph, but in welcome. In the great plaza, tables were dragged out, makeshift, beautiful. Food appeared from nowhere and everywhere. Terran rations mixed with Xelari spice fruit, Tessarian crystal milk, Krogan fire meat. Someone found a guitar. Someone else produced a Xelari chord harp that wept when played. Elias stood on the fountain's edge again, this time with Sophia on his shoulders and Kreshva steadying them both. He did not make a speech. He simply raised his hands, and the planet quieted. Then he began to sing, the same spiritual he had sung in the Courier when death was 90 seconds away. Wait in the water, children. 10 billion voices tried to follow. Most didn't know the words, but they knew the tune now. It rose like incense. When the last note faded, Elias looked out over the sea of faces, human, Xelari, and everything between, and spoke the only benediction that felt true. "We made it home," he said, voice breaking, "all of us." Far above, in orbit, the Covenant fleet hung in perfect stillness, no longer an armada, but a halo. Their running lights blinked in slow sequence, spelling out a message visible from the surface in letters 1,000 kilometers tall: "You are loved." On the surface, the eternal custodian, once the iron heart of the Dominion, walked unescorted through the crowd. Its mechanical legs had been removed. It moved now on simple prosthetics offered by a human child. It found Elias beside the fountain, lowered itself with difficulty, and placed something in his hands, a small data crystal containing every equation the Dominion had ever used to justify conquest. "I want to learn new ones," it said, voice synthetic but trembling. "Ones that include mercy as a constant." Elias closed the custodian's metal fingers around the crystal instead. "Keep it," he said. "We'll write the new ones together." Later, when the stars were sharp and the air smelled of cooking fires and forgiveness, Elias slipped away to a quiet garden on the edge of the city. He sat beneath a tree whose leaves chimed like glass in the wind and finally let himself shake. He wept, not for the dead, though they were many. He wept for the living who had been given one more day to choose kindness. He wept because he was only a man, and the weight of what had happened was too large for any one heart to carry alone. Kreshva found him there. She sat without speaking until his tears slowed. "I used to believe," she said at last, "that the universe was a solved equation. Now I think it is a question asked in love. And we are the answer being written, one imperfect line at a time." Elias wiped his face. "Then let's keep writing." Above them, the twin moons of the Xelari homeworld rose full and silver, and for the first time in 10,000 years, no one looked at them with fear. In the quiet, Elias felt it again, that gentle pressure, vast and fatherly, patient as starlight. "Thank you," he whispered to the night, "for not letting go." And somewhere deeper than language, the answer came, not in words, but in the simple, unshakable certainty that had carried him across battlefields and prison spheres and the edge of despair. "I never did." The city slept at last, human and Xelari curled together under shared blankets, children dreaming the same dreams for the first time in history. Tomorrow there would be work, wounds to heal, trust to earn, a galaxy to relearn how to live. But tonight, the only sound was breathing, billions of lungs drawing the same air, and the soft, steady heartbeat of a universe that had decided its story was not finished after all. And in the hush between one breath and the next, the father walked the garden paths unseen, smiling at children finally learning to recognize one another. The war was over. The family, fractured, wounded, beautiful, had come home. Years later, travelers on the new interstellar pilgrim routes told stories about the garden on Xellar Prime, where the trees sing when the wind moves through them. They said if you stood beneath the glass-leafed canopy at twilight, you could still hear an old human voice and a Xelari voice speaking together, quiet as confession, loud as prophecy. No one was ever turned away from that garden. Not the Krogan warlord who came to lay down his last blade. Not the Tessarian choir that sang until the stones wept light. Not the child, human or Xelari, who simply wanted to touch the simple wooden cross someone had planted in the soil, now grown into a living tree whose branches curved like open arms. Elias Grant never left. He could have. Offers came, governorships, sainthood, a seat on whatever fragile council was trying to hold the new peace together. He turned them all down with the same gentle smile. "My parish is right here," he would say, gesturing at the endless stream of pilgrims, penitents, and curious souls who crossed light years just to sit for an hour on a stone bench and talk about fear, forgiveness, and the long road home. He grew old in the garden. His hair went silver first, then white as starlight. The lines in his face deepened into something that looked less like age and more like a map of every tear ever shed and then dried by mercy. Children, human Xelari, and every shade between, called him Grandfather Elias or simply Grandfather. They climbed into his lap without asking, and he never minded. Kreshma never left either. Her missing arm was replaced eventually with a living graft of silverwood from the garden's first tree, and she became the galaxy's foremost scholar of what the new academies called Theo-Quantum Reconciliation. But every evening she laid down her data slates, walked the winding path to the garden, and sat at Elias's feet like the student she had finally admitted she always was. Sophia grew tall and fierce and kind. She piloted relief ships to the furthest rim worlds, but she always came home to the garden, bringing new stories and new wounds for the old man to bless. One spring evening, by the Xelari calendar, the season when the glass trees rang loudest, Elias did not rise from his bench at dawn. Kreshva found him there, hands folded peacefully over the silver cross he had worn since the day the Aurora's grace burned. His eyes were closed, a faint smile on his lips, as though he had simply heard a voice he had been waiting decades to hear again. Maria's voice, perhaps, or another, older and gentler still. They buried him beneath the singing tree whose roots had once been a cross. No grand mausoleum. Just a simple stone carved with words he had spoken. So often they had become the quiet heartbeat of the new age. Love answers when it is called. The galaxy mourned for a year and a day. Ships went dark. Cities held silence. Even the Tessarian choirs fell quiet. Then, slowly, people began to live again. Louder, kinder, braver, because that was what Elias had asked of them. Not mourning, living. Kreshva tended the garden alone for a while. Then Sophia came home for good. Then others, students, pilgrims, broken soldiers, curious scientists, until the garden was never empty and the tree never stopped singing. On the 10th anniversary of the landing, a new custom began. Every year on that date, wherever they were, on colony worlds, deep space stations, or the bridges of ships, people paused at local sunset, faced toward Xelari Prime, and spoke aloud the one prayer Elias had taught the galaxy. It was short enough for a child, deep enough for an elder, and it crossed every language without translation. Thank you for not letting go. And every year, without fail, something happened. Sensors registered a brief, inexplicable drop in local entropy. Comms channels filled with unexplained harmonics that sounded like distant singing. Children woke from nightmares smiling. Old enemies laid down ancient grudges without knowing why. The scientists called it the Grant resonance. The faithful called it something else. They simply called it love answering when it was called. Centuries passed. Empires rose and fell gently this time, guided by hands that had learned mercy was stronger than conquest. The garden on Xelari Prime became a living world heritage, untouched by war, unclaimed by any flag. The tree grew until its branches shaded half the valley, and its roots drank from a spring no one had ever found the source of. Pilgrims still came. They left offerings, a rusted helmet, a child's drawing, a data crystal full of equations that finally included mercy as a constant. They sat beneath the tree, told their stories, and left lighter. And on quiet nights when the twin moons rose silver and full, those who lingered swore they could see two figures walking the garden paths, an old human in a worn coat and a tall Xelari with a silverwood arm, talking softly, laughing sometimes, pausing to bless every soul who had come home. No one was ever afraid in that garden, because fear had learned, long ago, that it had no place where love had already won. And somewhere, beyond galaxies, beyond time, beyond every equation ever written, a father walked with his chaplain again, arm around shoulders that no longer carried the weight of galaxies. "Well done, Elias," the gentle voice said. "Well done." The old man smiled the same fierce, quiet smile he had worn the day he stepped unarmed onto an alien world and dared it to choose love. "I was just the messenger," he answered. "No," came the reply, warm as dawn and vast as starlight. "You were the message." And together, Father and Son, Creator and created, Love and the Beloved, they walked on through gardens that never ended, singing softly the song that had troubled the water, bent the lances, opened the prisons, and brought a broken family home. The longest road turned out to be the one that circled back to the beginning, to open arms, to a tree whose leaves still sing when the wind moves through them, to a love that never once let go. And in the hush between one age and the next, the galaxy kept breathing, billions of hearts beating the same quiet, defiant rhythm. Thank you for not letting go. Thank you for not letting go. Thank you. Forever.